Lord Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
King Herod heard of Jesus and his disciples, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying John the Baptizer had been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him. But others say it is Elijah, and others said it is a prophet like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had grudged against him and wanted to kill him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he had liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests, and the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it. And he solemnly swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? She replied, the head of John the Baptizer. Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and his guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
They're so valuable, they're still stealing them. Every one of these is about $6 a piece. And that's just this kind. The really fancy ones, like some of us have with the leather and all that stuff, go way up. But what it would mean is it's a total change in how we worship, too. Many of you remember the drastic change between the 1928 prayer book and our current prayer book. I bet a few people can still probably say the prayer of humble access were I to start it. We do not presume to come to this thy table, O merciful Lord. And everybody could go on. Well, we still do that at 7:45, but that was part of our regular liturgy. Well, they decided that it wasn't necessarily good stewardship to do that, especially when you think about how much our society is changing in terms of its electronics and all of those other things, that it could very well be that we can change liturgical materials without having to change out every single pew, every single book, but instead just add to what is already a good thing. So I thought that was actually a good thing that they did. Wow. A couple of other things they did is they pass a budget. Every 3 years they have to pass a budget before they leave General Convention. Otherwise, the church will cease to happen. Or at least in their mind it will. In the budget, we set some of our priorities. And one of the largest additions to our budget and actual focuses on our budget was racial reconciliation. Our church felt that our world right now is not being what I would call very good at loving our neighbor as ourselves. That we look at the other in a way that is just not who we are as Christians. And that we should be very cognizant of the fact that not everyone is welcomed or feels welcomed in places of worship or even in their own communities. And it's our job as Christians and as people of God to do something about it. That was one of the major things. One of the other things that happened, which I think was really exciting and wonderful, was the President of the House of Deputies was, up until this time, a voluntary position. The President of the House of Deputies has to give about 180 days a year, minimum, to doing the work of the President of the House of Deputies. And previously, it meant the person who was the President of the House of Deputies, whether they were lay or clergy, had their regular job that made it so that they could eat and all of those things. And they also had to be able to take leave from their job enough to go do all the things that they were doing as the vice president of the vice president of the Episcopal Church, because our legal entity has the presiding bishop as the president, the president of the House of Deputies is the vice president. So imagine if you were a priest like me and elected to be the president of the House of Deputies, which will never happen. Though if I were, I would be gone from here a lot of time. And I wouldn't be able to fully do what I was called to do as rector of St. Thaddeus. And yet, the two of the last three presidents of the House of Bishops, or House of Deputies, were full-time rectors of major cardinal parishes in their dioceses. So now they've decided, in what I think is a very smart move, to let the president of the House of Deputies do what their job is as president of the House of Deputies and not be asked to divide themselves from their ministry to the church to which they were called. So that is a good thing. That is also recognizing that we pay our presiding bishop to do that same thing as the president of the House of Bishops, but we somehow wanted it to be like a volunteer thing for the House of Deputies because bishops are special. And it took a little while to convince people to do it, but it was the right thing to do. Some other areas they did was they recognized at last General Convention, they changed the whole structure of the church in terms of what it does between conventions. They took away almost all the commissions, committees, and boards of the Episcopal Church and decided instead to have just a few. And then when they needed it, they'd add a task force or two. Well, everybody came back and said, you know what? All those commissions, committees, and boards that were really doing some of the great work of the church didn't get to do that work these last 3 years. So they approved 39 new task forces to go and do some of the work that's important to this church. For instance, one of them is stewardship. We're a church that really requires us to look at how we are going to be in a church in the future. And for us to simply ignore that for 3 years has not been helpful to everyday churches like our own. And bringing together leaders of those in those ministries during those 3 years to help then bring that back out to the rest of the wider church community, important work. And important as to who we are as Episcopalians, because we are interrelated to each other. We are not a congregation unto ourselves. We are the whole of the Episcopal Church. And in fact, the presiding bishop would describe it as, we are the Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement. Well, what does that mean? Well, I'll tell you that presiding bishop, I think, is one of the finest priests and bishops ever. We elected this gentleman 3 years ago. Michael Curry is one of the finest preachers. Most of you probably who saw the most recent royal wedding saw that he's a pretty good preacher. Well, he gave a revival at the beginning of convention and has laid out for us what it is for us to be part of the Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement and how we can learn to the way of love and express our lives as Christians. And one of the things he did, and you'll see these are on a table in the back, you can grab them on the way out. This is basically an outline of what he believes we are called to do and be as Christians. And it's this: that first you turn, pause, listen, and choose to follow Jesus. That's an important part for us, that we take that time to recognize that we have to turn away from those things that are not who we are as a follower of Jesus, and face in a direction that puts our journey in that way. Then we're called to learn, to reflect on Scripture each day, especially the teachings of Jesus and his life. Next, we're called to pray every day. We dwell intentionally on God each day. Take the time to pray. Even if it's only a couple minutes of quiet solitude to just go through your, okay, God, I need you on these things today. Or, okay, God, I'm thankful that these things happened today or didn't. Next is to worship. Gather in community weekly to thank, praise, and dwell with God. This one, I think, is more important than people realize. We have so many other distractions in our lives, so many things that automatically take up our life. When we can come here and spend that little bit of time, that 1 hour, dwelling with other people of faith, recharging our batteries to do the things that we are called to do in our lives, to face the world knowing we are not alone, to come and worship, to celebrate Jesus in our lives. Next is to bless. Share faith unselfishly. Give and serve. We've got to be able to share our faith, be comfortable enough to let everybody know that we are who we are. We're imperfect, but we're faithful. We believe in a God that loves us and that redeemed us. We've got to share that with others. There's not enough people that are around this world right now that know that they are loved, that know that there's another place to be and another way to go, and we need to be a part of that. Next, it says, go, cross boundaries, listen deeply, and live like Jesus. One of the things that happened at the General Convention this year that happened once before was the bishops had a thing where they have a bishops' coalition against gun violence. And basically they all stood up and said, we believe gun violence needs to stop. And we want to more than just pray, we want to stand up and say, let's do something about it, not just as Christians, let's do something about this. The other thing they did, partly because of the location where they found themselves, they were in Austin, Texas for this general convention. And all of them went to a detention center that's holding those folks who are right now trying to find out whether they'll be able to immigrate or not. Those people who are the other, who are the foreigner in our midst. And they went and stood outside the fences and prayed with and for them. And said that we as Christians know that our job is to welcome the foreigner in our midst. And that we will do our part in trying to make sure that the families are kept together. I think that's a valid Christian witness. And that's definitely crossing some boundaries. It's listening deeply, and it's living like Jesus. Jesus turned over tables in a temple because people weren't paying attention to what it was all about, why we are Christian, why we are here. The last one is rest. Receive the gift of God's grace, peace, and restoration. You notice that worship and rest are not together there. Sabbath is not just taking Sunday off. Sabbath is taking that time on Sunday to really recharge your batteries, to rest and be still. Our society wants us to work 7 days a week, to do all sorts of things that keep us from listening for God and being alone and with God and resting and recharging our batteries to do the incredible work that our lives call us to do. All is a part of our faith. This Jesus movement is important. It's a part of who we are. The other thing that what happens when we really truly embrace that Jesus movement and make our church that kind of place that is welcoming, open, and loving is that we become this incredible beloved community. And we create that. We create a space of belovedness. And that is extremely important. Because when we do that, we make it so everyone else has access to being loved by God. Amen.